So the topic at hand is how to use free will effectively. Now, before we begin, it is useful to recap some of the ideas around free will that we had discussed in prior talks. So we'll just do maybe a free will one-on-one here. And before we start, it should be noted that some of what we're discussing here is found not in any one place within the theosophical corpus, but you find it spread in various books, in various ancient texts, such as Bhagavad Gita, in the Dhammapada, and so on and so forth. And it has to be kind of synthesized. So in that synthesis, there can be, as we say, like a first order derivative of the teachings. And so there may, in fact, be certain understandings that are specific to a student. If such arises, we can consider them in the discussions at the end of the talk. So the phenomenology of human experience eventually boils down to this diagram that we're looking at here. There is this person, which is you, and there is the oval around you, which you can think of as the environment, the conditions within which you are existing. Now, there are things that happen to you from the environment, which we call stimulus. And based on those stimuli, we respond. And when we respond, we impinge upon the environment as well. And such actions we call karma, of course. And this karma, we know from the fundamental teachings of theosophy, through the law of causation, which is also called karma, comes back to us as reactions, which is also called karma. And that karma then becomes the kind of situations, the circumstances, which then become the stimuli for us, thus closing the circle. Now, what we'll quickly see here is that we think about these circumstances, things that happen to us, as destiny, because we don't see where they come from. The second aspect to note is that destiny isn't just what happens to us. The reactions of karma isn't just the things that happen to us. Karma also determines who we are, the very vehicle that we are operating. This body, its various subtler koshas, are all the results of karma, as well as that arrow at the bottom is showing. So even the actor, his body, is the result of destiny or prior action, karma. Now, we know that in science we say nature and nurture make a man. The destiny coming in from circumstances is essentially nurture, things that are happening to us, that are training us. That which is coming from the bottom is nature. So when both nature and nurture are completely predetermined, the question that people ask is, why aren't my actions fully predetermined? And this is the scientific understanding where they deny the existence of free will, because science kind of considers man to be entirely only his body, which is fully determined by the laws of physics. You don't have any space for there to be free will. So free will is actually rejected from a scientific perspective. But theosophy comes in here and posits the existence of a higher self, which is a non-acting, recording, witness. This is, you can think of it as noetic influence on the lower, which you can call psychic. The best analogy for how the higher influences the lower is to think of the sun, which is unconnected with the earth, still radiates its low entropic energy on earth and makes all action on earth possible. And yet it is unconnected, it doesn't act on earth, it is simply a non-acting recording witness, as it were. And another analogy you can think of is as magnet. When you run a magnet over a few iron filings, it induces magnetism into those filings. But the magnet itself isn't acting. There is there is an environment within which that magnetism is induced. And this we call in theosophy the efflux of the higher that is reflected in the lower, or the lower manas. And through that, we are endowed with a faculty of the higher self, which is will. Now, the destiny that is coming from below, which is forming our nature, is essentially that of kama, desire. So we have desire from the bottom, which is our lower self, which is impelling us into certain actions. And there is will from the higher self, which is influencing us in a higher direction. And man is essentially a compound, a mixture of these two influences. And he is essentially, you can think of him as a point in the spectrum between the higher will and the lower desire. And he can move anywhere within that spectrum. Once you have that, your actions now become a mixture of course, predestined, karmic actions, things that we unconsciously just on autopilot perform, and also things where we specifically use our concerted will to override our desires and act in altruistic, beneficial ways. So our actions are also a mixture of the two. And one way to think about this is using the analogy of sowing and reaping. When you reap, you're not reaping fruits that are randomly coming to you. You're reaping the fruits of what you sowed. So when you sow, you're making some effort of will, which through the cycle of karma comes back to you, and you reap the very fruits that you sow. And in the Dhammapada, the first verse captures this very well. It says, all that we are is the result of what we have thought. So our thinking, which drives our actions, essentially in this loop, forms the very entity that is man. And that entity acts in concomitance, in the same nature as his swabhava, his prakriti, his acquired nature, according to his acquired nature. Now, the question that we can, if you look at this diagram, the question that one would naturally ask is, if that higher has an arrow coming into this personality, this man that you see there, can that will bypass all of the internal koshas, all of our desires, come directly into our karmendriyas, the organs of action, and directly act? Can will act directly? And the answer to that is no, and we can use this analogy to see why. Now, if you look at that line at the bottom, it's essentially that spectrum that we talked about, the spectrum between the lower and the higher, will and desire. And you can think of your attention as analogous to the sun. In this case, you can think of it as a grow light. And you only have will in directing your attention, right, in that spectrum. And depending on where you let your attention dwell, the seeds that are inherent in your nature sprout and grow concomitant with that nature. Here you see that the grow light is constantly dwelling on the lower end of that spectrum, and you see a tree that has sprouted up there. And on the higher end, occasionally maybe you spend some time thinking about it, you see that the flowers at the higher end are quite shrunk. So you are forming your nature based on where you let your attention dwell. The meditation of your life, as William Kujat said, essentially forms you. And it's a mixture of desire and will. One other analogy we spoke about today in the study class is Susrukshu Shakti and Srujya Shakti. The seeds that are inherent in your nature are the Srujya Shakti. The light of attention and consciousness that you shine on it is analogous to Susrukshu Shakti. It lets it sprout and grow and become part of your nature. In Platonic terminology, this is nous persuading necessity. Necessity is the nature at the bottom, and nous is that the higher faculty shining and being used to persuade it. It cannot directly act on it. It can persuade it to act a certain way. Okay, now we saw that will cannot act directly. It persuades prakriti, swabhavas act a certain way, which means that there is a temporal gradient to free will. So this is you can think of it as this graph. The graph is not, it's only illustrative. It's the decay in the graph has no meaning. When you haven't acted, when I'm sitting right here, right now, and looking inward and seeing where I want to let my attention dwell, you can all do this experiment right now. You have 100% free will in directing your attention to any thought, any internal subject that you may choose. You can in fact choose to completely block out everything I'm saying and choose to meditate on some subject that is completely unrelated to your immediate surroundings. Even that is possible. So you have 100% free will in where you let your attention dwell. Now that engenders certain swabhavas, as we saw with the sprouting of the trees. Depending on where you let your attention dwell, in that concomitant with that nature, you engender swabhavas, tendencies, khandhas. And those khandhas act. And as you can see, as this is happening, you are losing free will. By the time you have generated swabhavas, there are only a fixed number of swabhavas you've generated. You don't have free will in choosing a swabhava that you haven't, shall we say, cultivated. For example, the words I'm using in this sentence right now I'm choosing between a set of words that I have inbuilt into my swabhava. I cannot choose a word I haven't cultivated as a swabhava. I have some free will in the words that I know in my vocabulary. I cannot suddenly start speaking in Inuit language or something like that, because it's not a swabhava I've cultivated. So I don't have free will there. So already by the time you come to swabhava into action, you have attenuated the amount of free will you have. When I'm speaking the words right now, I have some free will in the choice of words, but I don't have free will in choosing the language that I haven't learned, for example. And once you act, actions produce results, which become destiny, at which point you have zero free will. Right? So there is a temporal gradient to free will, and it rapidly decays as you approach the action and results. Okay, now this is just the 101 of how we can think of free will and how that works. To understand how we can use free will effectively, there is this paradox called Newcomb's paradox. This became viral on the internet recently, and there was a lot of discussion around how you resolve this paradox. To this student, it felt like shining this light of what we learned about free will on this paradox actually gives us some very interesting takeaways. It actually, in a way, illuminates the very paradox of free will that is encapsulated in life. So understanding this paradox will, and kind of playing with it a little bit, will try to explore the various ways in which, modes in which we can use free will, and which of it is effective. Newcomb's paradox, the way he wrote it in his paper, is not very conducive to students of theosophy. To make it more conducive to us, we will have to introduce a character from the Egyptian Book of the Dead. So in the Egyptian Book of the Dead, the scene that you see here is from the papyri of Ani, I think. It basically is, the first scene is the weighing of the heart in the Hall of Two Truths. The reason it's called the Hall of Two Truths is because the defunct comes into the hall and confesses how it lived its life. It'll say, I have lived really well. But that's one truth. Then Anubis weighs its heart, right? And then that is the second truth, what the heart says, how the defunct has lived. We'll introduce a few characters here. That the bird sitting there with the human head is Ba. Ba is essentially the efflorescence of the personality, that part of the soul that fuses with what is called Ka, the vital principle, and becomes Ankh, to dwell among the gods, basically Devachan. It is that part of the personality that is going into Devachan and is awaiting to see if it can enter Devachan or not. The heart of the deceased is on one end of the scale, and the other end, it has this feather of Maat. Maat is the personification of truth and cosmic balance and justice. So the heart is being weighed to see if the confessions of the deceased are actually true. Then there is a couple of goddesses there who basically preside over childbirth and birth and preservation, and they accompany the deceased soul until the very end. Then there is this god there called Shai, who is fate or destiny. He also apparently is born with a personality and stays with it until this point of judgment. Those who have seen or read Shankara Vaibhavam or seen the movie on Shankara, Shankara also has two invisible companions all through his life. One was death, the other was fate and destiny, and so Shai is one of those. Then there's Thoth. We have heard of Thoth, Hermes, Buddha in our theosophical literature a lot, god of wisdom. Here he is the scribe, he is the impartial judge. And then you have Amit, which is basically a kind of a conglomeration of a lion, a hippo, and a crocodile. It is a creature that will devour the heart if the heart turns out to have, doesn't win the weighing against the feather of Maat. In which case, the defunct probably goes into Kamaloka, let's say. Duat is how it is said in Egypt. And then this is the hero that we need for our paradox, that is Anubis. Anubis is that jackal-headed guardian of the scales. He is reading the defunct heart and actually getting what is really in the heart of the defunct. The real motives, the meditation of one's life, the seeds that were tended to by the soul throughout their life, right? That is Anubis. Okay, now let's look at the paradox. We'll state the problem. You guys should pay some attention because we'll ask a question at the at the end for you to choose how you would act. It's going to be interesting. So the paradox, the problem is as such. There is a room. Okay, the room has an entrance and a table. On the table, there is one box, this red box, box A, which is opaque. You don't know what's in the box. You cannot see what's in the box. Okay. And then there is a transparent box, box B, in which you see $1,000. Okay. There's constantly $1,000 in box B. It's transparent. You can see it. And then there is our hero Anubis in the room. Okay. Now you are here outside the room, and the rules are as follows. You can do one of two things. You're told you can go into the room and either only pick box A, which is opaque, you don't know what's in it. That's one choice. Or go in and pick both boxes, A and B. If I just stop here, everybody will just pick both boxes. It just makes sense because no matter what's in the other box, even if it's empty, you at least get the $1,000. But that's there are more rules. The next rule says this: just as you enter, Anubis is going to read your heart. Okay, he's going to weigh your heart. And if he sees that you will only pick box A, then he'll place $1 million in it. So he'll read the heart. The heart says, I will only pick box A, the opaque box. Then he'll place $1 million in there. Now, you go, if let's say he reads your heart, otherwise he doesn't find that it says only box A. Let's say either it is confused, it's unsure. or it says, I'll pick both boxes. Then he places nothing in box A. It is empty, $0. Okay. Now you go into the room and you have to decide. You don't know what's in box A, right? It may be empty. It may have $1 million, depending on what Anup is read in your heart. The other box is transparent. It has $1,000. What will you do?
He knows about the third rule.
Which third rule?
That if he, that Anubis will read and then.
Yes, yes.
He knows it.
He knows about it. He knows all the rules.
He knows that third rule.
Yes, he knows all the rules. You know all the rules. You've been told the 3 rules before you enter. You somehow make up your mind. You maybe convince your heart to do one or the other thing. Just before you enter, Anubis reads your heart. If he's sure that you're only going to pick box A, he'll put $1 million in there. If he sees in your heart that you're either unsure or you're saying, I'll pick both boxes, if the heart says that you're not saying anything, then he'll not place anything in there. So by the time you're standing here, either Anubis has read in your heart that you're only picking box A and nothing else and has placed $1 million in there, or he has placed nothing in there. Now, what do? Do you just pick box A and walk out? Or do you pick both boxes? Let's maybe take a poll here. How many people will pick both boxes? You'll at least get $1,000 and walk out of the room. Just show of hands. What would you do? You have to have some. Yes. You'll only pick box A. Okay. How many people will only pick box A? Okay. Wow. Majority. Okay. What would the other two who didn't answer? Like, what would you do? Box A or both boxes? You're standing here. There is one. You see $1,000 in a transparent box. Would you pick both boxes? You'll only pick box A. You leave the 1,000. Sounds like a lot of people just will pick box A. I don't know. Online, you guys can make up your own mind. Well, here's the math behind it. So it turns out there are 2 mathematical models that you can use. The math is not important. We'll simply look at it just to show that there is a paradox here. So one mathematical model is dominance, which is very simple. It is that, all it says is that at the time of choosing, when you're standing in the room, Anubis has already made his choice, right? He's already done whatever he's done. You have no control over that. Now you're just looking at one opaque box and one transparent box with $1,000 in it. So you only have these 4 choices, or this 4 grid. Either the box is $1 million, the opaque box, box A, or it does not. And you have only 2 choices. Either you pick box A or you pick both boxes. Look at what the results are, right? If you pick only box A, if it has $1 million, you get $1 million. Otherwise, you get 0. If you pick both, you get million and 1,000, $1.001 million, or you at least get $1,000, right?
What how do you get $1 million?
Because in one situation, right? So like, let's see here. So in the situation that the box has $1 million in it, if you pick both, one has $1 million, the other has 1,000 for sure. You know that. So it is million plus 1,000, which is correct. Correct. So Anubis has already made the choice. There is no, he cannot go back in time and change anything, right? But if you pick only A and the Anubis hasn't put anything in A, you end up with $0.
Right, and the truth is, we really don't know our own heart. Isn't that true?
Sorry, what was the question?
I was just saying, and the truth is, we really don't know our own heart.
There you go. He's saying we truly don't know what's in our heart. So we cannot tell what Anubis did. If you truly know what was in your heart, then you will definitely know if something is there or not. That's really the crux of it. Do you know what's really in your heart? What did your heart confess on your behalf? What was the real intention? I bet a lot of people will say, I'm going to like lie and say, and then go in there and take both or whatever it is. Like, you don't know what your inner heart's motives are. That's why people who are hesitating. Yes.
But I chose the first box.
Oh, okay.
Thinking that It's mysterious.
Right.
Yeah,
Great. Yes.
That is important mystery.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. It's worth the risk.
It's worth the risk. Yeah, yeah, yeah. So, but if you look at the average of these two, right, you see that it is basically the average of the first. If you just pick box A, you on average make 500K. On the other, you make $500 more. Okay, there's another way to run this experiment or run the mathematical model. Here you say, and going back to Stephen's point, what is the probability that you know what's in your heart? Say that's P, right? Then there is something called probability expected utility function. It sounds kind of complicated, but actually very simple. It's the probability you know that your heart is saying box A times $1 million. That's what you'd get. The probability that the inverse of it, 1 minus P times 0, because if you don't know, you get 0. This whole term can go away because it is 0. Now all you are left with is the probability you know what's in your heart, and you know it's going to say box A times 1 million, which if you play out, looks like this graph. So if there is 0 probability of your heart saying box A, you get $0. If the probability is 1, you get $1 million. And there's a linear line between the two. And if you draw this line here, basically what it's saying is if you're more than 50% sure, you make more money. Basically, you're here, right? All of this is more than 500K, right? But if it's less, then you're better off picking the other both boxes, essentially. So in one mathematical model, dominance is saying pick both boxes. It's better, right? Expected utility is saying if you at least have a 50% higher than 50% probability, you want to pick only box A. They are two different answers from different valid mathematical models, which is why there is a paradox. So how do you solve this paradox? Essentially hinges on, can you convince yourself to act a certain way even against enticements, right? The $1,000 is an enticement. Before you go into the room, can you convince yourself, even when I'm there with all of these shiny, enticements that are guaranteed, will I still act in exactly the same way that I resolved to act? So it's a question of free will. A lot of us have this question, right? We resolve to act a certain way. Every New Year resolution is like that. And then there are a bunch of enticements that come during the... Yeah. Exactly. Yes. Yes. Correct. Correct. So in which case you should pick both boxes, because you think your heart is always going to lie in a way, meaning your head is saying I'll resolve to pick one box, but you know in your heart that you haven't modified your swabhava enough that it will act that way no matter what. Right? Exactly like New Year resolutions. You resolve to, I don't know, not drink sugary drinks. And then you eat a pizza and there's a Coke next to it. Will you still act as you resolve to act? If the probability is greater than 50, then you should pick only box A. Like that's what this math is saying. Anyway, so there are notions of free will that you can get out of this thought experiment, and we'll look at a few of those. That's Newcomb's paradox. So if you don't use free will as an argument, what Newcomb's paradox ends up with is saying there are two mathematical models that are telling you to do different things. That's the paradox. So we believe notions of free will and the correct understanding of notions of free will help us explore that paradox a little better. Okay, so the first thing that we should explore is there is no free will. This is what MLR just said. Your actions are somewhat overdetermined by all of the choices you've made in the past. And this fragment 2, Voice of the Silence, captures it in a very poignant way. It says, such is thy karma. The karma of the cycles of thy births, the destiny of those who in their pain and sorrow are born along with thee, rejoice and weep from life to life, chained to your previous actions. So if you chain to your previous actions, there is very little free will. If you are in a life with unrelenting difficulties, it robs you of agency. We all probably know people in such a state. Free choice. There's an illusion of choice. Illusion of choice in such a state. Less intuitively, and the student has at least seen one example of this, a very pleasurable life with a lot of leisure also robs one of free will. It becomes a loss of motivation. The person is simply in a boat that is being driven along in what they may seem as a happy path. There is no exercise of free will. So you can be in a situation where there is no free will. And there is another analogy that you can look at here. When the last strand is woven, this is from SD volume 1, and man is seemingly enwrapped in the network of his own doing, then he finds himself completely under the empire of his self-made destiny. So there are situations when this is true. There is very little free will, there's very little agency. And what do you do in those situations? Well, we're given in the Voice of the Silence, it says, as a great tidal wave, thou shalt let run its course. It's a kind of acceptance, not to meddle with the effects, but to start sowing better causes for the future. That requires, but the better causes you can sow no matter how extenuating your circumstances, because in your way you let your attention dwell, you have full free will. There may be effects buffeting you everywhere, but you can still place your attention on higher, like we saw on the trees and the flower. You can place your attention on higher realm and engender swabhavas concomitant with that and dig yourself out of this world. Anyway, so let's say you're not in this situation. You have some agency in life. When you have such agency, how should you use it? Okay, to see how you should use it, let's take an analogy of this Newcomb's paradox into this Bhagavad Gita verse. It says, Bahya sparsheshva saktatma vindatyatmani yat sukham sa brahma yoga yuktatma sukham akshayam ashnute. He whose heart is not attached to objects of sense, that is the Bahya sparsha. The sparsha meaning touching outside the objects of senses. Bahya sparsha. He whose heart is not attached to objects of sense finds pleasure within himself, and through devotion united with the Supreme enjoys imperishable bliss. Okay, in this, the analogy we're drawing is the Bahya sparsha sukha, sense pleasures, is that $1,000. It is openly there in a transparent container. You can take it anytime you want. The Sukham Akshayam, Akshaya Sukha, illimitable bliss. That's the $1 million. Use that analogy and let's go through this Newcomb's paradox through a few models of how we can imagine free will works. There is one model of free will called libertarian free will, which basically says that we have instantaneous free will, meaning no matter what choices I've made in the past, right now I can choose any action. I'm free to choose any action. So they show this libertarian free will using this diagram that you see on the right, where let's say you made some choice in the past and you're now here in the now. If you go back in time, it also erases your memory, by the way, when you go back in time, to the exact same circumstances, can you make a different choice? That's libertarian free will. If you say yes, you're saying I have libertarian free will. It also means instantaneously, this instant, I can choose to do I'm unrestrained by my prior choices. That's a model of free will most people have. If you really ask yourself, we all almost operate as if we have that kind of free will. We'll see what the expectation of such a person who believes in libertarian free will is in Newcomb's paradox. So somebody who believes in libertarian free will, what will the person say? They will lie and say, I will definitely pick only box A, right? And then as they're about to enter, Anubis will ask their heart. They think they have convinced their heart, and they think their heart will say only box A. And Anubis will put $1 million into box A. They'll enter the room. They will now change their mind instantaneously. They think they have instantaneous free will and say, now I'm going to take both boxes. Great. I have $1.001 million. They're really happy, and Anubis is really angry that he got tricked. This is how somebody who has libertarian free will imagines life works, right? Let's look at this from the Bhagavad Gita, another Bhagavad Gita verse that we actually considered in the beginning. Antakale cha mameva smaran muktva kalevaram yaf prayati sa madbhavam yati natyastra samshaya. Whoever at the hour of death abandoneth the body fixed in meditation upon me without doubt goeth to me. So if you believe in libertarian free will, you would say, I can have the cake and eat it too. I'm going to enjoy all the sense, objects, bahya sparsha, all I want, $1,000, I'll take it throughout life. At the hour of death, I will meditate on Krishna and also get the $1 million. A lot of people assume this is the case. So many people in India give advice to young people, say, don't read Bhagavad Gita right now. You enjoy life. You will have time to read Bhagavad Gita when you're sitting in decrepit years of your late years. That's when they give such advice, they're assuming you can do this and get away with it, right? Okay, let's look at libertarian free will reality. In reality, you do not have instantaneous free will. We saw the arrangement of free will, right? Where you let your attention dwell engenders swabhavas over time. That swabhava is what acts. You don't have instantaneously, you cannot change. And the second thing is, you cannot convince your heart to lie for you like that. When Anubis weighs your heart isn't going to lie. And this is what William Q. Judd says. You think that motive is well known to you. This is Stephen's point. Whereas it is hidden deep within you. And by that hidden motive, you will be judged. So let's look at what happens in reality. We saw the expectation of a libertarian free will. In reality, you will lie and say, I will definitely only pick box A. As you're about to enter, Anubis asks your heart, it will say, sorry, he's going to pick both. You'll come in, he'll not add any dollars to box A. You come in, you say, okay, I'll now take both boxes. You end up with $1,000. And you are really sad. Anubis laughs at your ignorance. That's what really happens. So if you enjoy only sense benefits throughout life, at the end of your life, you cannot. It's impossible for you to meditate on Krishna and go to him, even though he's promised that will happen. And this, he says, that's why Krishna says this in the very next verse. He says, Tasmat sarveshu kaleshu maam anusmara yudhyacha mayarpitamano buddhir mame vaishyasya samshaya. Therefore, at all times, meditate only on me. He isn't saying only at the end of the life. If you haven't meditated on me all through your life, you won't be able to meditate on me at the hour of death. And fight. Thy mind and buddhi being placed on me alone, thou shalt without doubt come to me. So this is the reality of libertarian free will. Okay, let's look at a slightly different model of free will, which we can say is the desire-driven will. This is a very common mode of operation for people. And here, this verse from the second chapter of the Bhagavad Gita captures the essence of desire-driven will. It says, Indriyanam hi charatam yan manonu vidhiyate tasya harati pranyam vayurnavam vivambhasi. The uncontrolled heart, following the dictates of the moving passions, snatcheth away his spiritual knowledge as the storm, the bark upon the raging ocean. Desire-driven will is like a bark upon raging ocean. It is getting blown hither and thither. So let's look at what happens in this Newcomb's paradox to one who has desire-driven will. What happens? The person has greed. They will say, I really want the $1 million. And then they have fear. They say, but I'm afraid of walking out with $0. And as they're about to enter the room, Anubis asks the heart, what does the heart say? Desire, fear. It's oscillating between desire and fear. And once, of course, Anubis is not going to add any money into box A. Once you stand there, you're fully confused. You don't know what your heart said. You are literally seeing the $1,000. You likely probably take. Correct. Anubis knows the heart is vacillating between greed and fear and adds nothing. So at best, you end up with $1,000. If you're confused and you only took box A, you end up with nothing. So yeah, you're really happy, and Anubis rolls his eyes. There is another final model of free will that is recommended, that works. That's the only way in which you get $1 million. That's the only way in which you reach Krishna. And that's this. This is Bhagavad Gita chapter 9. Manmana bhava madbhakto madhyaji mam namaskuru mame vaishyasi yuktvaivam atmanam matparayana. Engage your mind always in thinking of me. You go back to the where you place your attention, where you let your attention dwell. Engage your mind always in thinking of me. Offer obeisances and worship me. Being completely absorbed in me, surely you will come to me. Here, of course, Krishna, what does it mean to offer obeisance and worship him? Krishna in the 10th chapter of the Bhagavad Gita, as the first Vibhuti says, Aham Atma Gudakesha Sarva Bhutashaya Sthita. I am as Atma sitting in every Bhuta, every sentient being on earth. So, service of humanity, through service of humanity, you serve Krishna. So that's offering obeisance and worship. That's concerted will. Throughout, always engage your mind, always thinking of me. That is concerted. There is a pattern to your life because you're always letting your attention dwell on the higher. Okay, for such a person, how will this Newcomb's paradox play out? Well, you say, I only want the $1 million, I only want Krishna, nothing else, right? And you mean it. So when you come and Anubis weighs your heart, it says, yes, only box A. That's all this heart wants. He puts $1 million in the box. You enter. You also only take box A because you have programmed your swabhava to do that. With such precise application of will that you only take box A, you get $1 million. You are saintly and Anubis is happy. This is concerted will. So in summary, we can say, like, how do you use free will effectively? Well, first, you have to understand how will works. You cannot have such ideas as instantaneous will, libertarian will. All of these wrong ideas of will not give you the ability to effectively use it. You have to have the correct understanding of how it works. You should know what you want. And you should know that $1 million is incomparably better than $1,000. Or union with Krishna, which is, what is it? Sukham Akshayam is illimitable compared to Bahya Sparsha. You cannot have both. That is the have the cake and eat it too idea, right? Where you try to let your heart lie for you. It doesn't work that way. You have to give up one to get the other. You have to know that the $1 million is worth having, and you should know that you cannot have the cake and eat it too. You have to give up Bahya Sparsha to get Sukham Akshayam. And to do that, you have to align your personal will to cosmic will. And how do you do that? You can think of it in the analogy of a leaf. A leaf that's growing on a tree, which, let's say, that's the tree of humanity. If the leaf has its own little will and does whatever it wants, like doesn't do photosynthesis, whatever, what happens to that leaf? It just withers and falls off. But if that leaf follows the cosmic will of the tree, which is to sprout, grow, and go skyward, if it turns up to the sun, does the best photosynthesis it can, enriches and nourishes the tree, what happens? The leaf becomes bigger, it maybe becomes a twig, it sprouts a few more leaves, it becomes maybe a branch. The branch gives rise to flowers, flowers to fruits, fruits give rise to seeds, seeds give rise to new trees. When that leaf, the personal will, is aligned with the will of the tree is doing well, the leaf is doing well. Like, that's the alignment. And the takeaway here is, what does it mean to align personal will to cosmic will? Just like the leaf strove to do the best it can for the tree, strive to serve humanity in whatever way is possible. That's how you align your little personal will to cosmic will. And just like how a leaf became a big branch and was able to create trees of its own in the next cycle, that much power exists in such an alignment. So that's the most effective way to use free will. So we'll stop here and open the floor up for any questions, comments, or discussions.